hard to see in this mask. Oh, we knocked your hat off. Okay, let's fix that. All right, I gotta take this mask off. Ah, that's better. Happy Halloween. So are we scary witches? Oh, okay. I'm a stitchy witch. I see I got a measuring tape, and I've got one of my little pin cushions up here, if you can see it. I can't find it. So, Double T is not a scary witch, not a stitchy witch. Double T is an itchy witch because the mask is exacerbating his psoriasis. So happy Halloween, you guys. I was making a turtle hat just an hour ago. This hat pattern is by Melissa Patterns. I bought it last year, like right after Halloween, and I was like, man, I wish I'd had this for Halloween. That'd be so cute. Anyway, so I finally made it. I made it out of cheater cloth. Oh my goodness. So, hey Mod Art, Druid, my dear, Mishral, happy Halloween. I love Halloween. It's the best. I've got these crazy noises going on by my house. Somebody in my near vicinity must be having some work done today because I keep hearing crazy noises. It's getting a little annoying, actually. So I think you're gonna have to sit down for a bit. I've got Halloween things to do. Okay. I'm afraid I'm going to have to say no to trick-or-treating as Sexy Moodang tonight because, first of all, you are like 150 years old, so trick-or-treating is probably not appropriate. Also, Sexy Moodang, I should have never let you watch Mean Girls. All right, go sit down. So, I don't know if you guys have plans for tonight. Got some trick-or-treaters coming. I think I remember having this conversation last year, and I know that I know some of you live too rural, don't get many trick-or-treaters. I live on a crazy busy road, so even though we have sidewalks, I don't want to encourage the trick-or-treaters because it's a dangerous road. There have actually been fatalities on my road, so not very cool for Halloween. So anyway, we turn our light off. We don't do the Halloween trick-or-treating stuff anymore. I want to keep the kitties safe. They do trunk or treat around here a lot, which I think is probably a good thing. These days, I remember when I was a kid, it was pretty much like, there was always a parent with us when we were little, but it was kind of like, here's your bag, go to town, kids, because our neighborhood was safe. And there was always the old couple on the corner that had apple trees. So they would just pick their apples and give those out for Halloween. This is in the 70s and 80s. This is the time when people are really freaking out about stuff. The candy. There is actually, I don't know that there has ever been any documented incidents where candy has been tampered with like razor blades and horrible things like that. But there is a tampered candy murder story, basically, where a man was trying to kill his children, and he tampered with their Halloween, their trick-or-treating, in order to try and kill his children for the life insurance money. How horrible. But this happened, I think it was the late 70s or early 80s. So when I was a kid, it was always like, don't eat any of your candy till your parents check it, and, all that stuff. So, there's always got to be some cuckoo that ruins everything. But anyway, happy Halloween, y'all. So, I know you guys have been talking about something. So, see, Mod Art, exciting news, heading out to New York this weekend to see a quilt you have. That's wonderful. So, quilts equals art equals quilt show at the Schweinfurth. Okay. I'm not familiar with that. I don't know if it's a gallery or museum. Where in New York is that? That is so awesome, Mod Art. Congratulations. Your quilts are sublime. I'm so excited for you. Um, Druid. Yeah. Oh, actually, yes. I got a bun. This hat's perfect. So yes, this hat would be great for you, Druid. You could get all the hair up in there. So Mistral, quiet neighborhood, 20-ish kids, still buying up candy for 400. Yeah, Moderate, 5 pounds of candy. I have not bought any candy this year. Can you believe it? Because I eat it. My son also texted me earlier today and said, "What are you doing tomorrow?" And I'm like, "I'm going to the DAR symposium." He's like, "Ah, bummer. I thought that we could go get the discount candy." Because he did put that on my calendar. What a creeper. So let's see. The Schweinfurth is in Auburn, New York. Is that upstate? I'm terrible with my New York geography. I know, I pretty much know what's around the city, and that's about it. So, Finger Lakes region. Okay. Going on the cheap, because you're car camping in the Subaru. The Subaru is good for car camping. Okay, this hat's gonna drive me crazy. I'll wear it later tonight and annoy my husband with it. Oh gosh. All right. Solid life choice. Yeah, we drive the Subarus, man. Mine is getting very old. Mine is she's a gray-haired lady. She was born in 2002. But yeah, Subarus are great. My neighbor just bought a Subaru. Very exciting. They're good cars. So, I'm going to have to check out more about the Schweinfurth. I don't know the Finger Lakes region. Very nice. It's where Double T is from. Druids is the same age as mine. Yes, different color. If I remember correctly, is yours green? I'm drawing a blank. I remember we talked about this before. Mine is blue, or it used to be blue. It's got some rusty patches now. But that's the thing. Oh, gold. Okay. That's the thing about some cars. My father-in-law had a Volkswagen and a Toyota that, I think were older than some of his children at the point he finally got rid of them. But yeah, the Subarus, everybody I know has kept their Subarus for a really long time. Oh my God, my hair is horrible. I envisioned wearing the hat longer. Anyway. So, I thought car before was a Mazda. Also a golden chariot. Oh gosh, yes, Mod Art. I can't wait to see the pictures. It'll probably be beautiful up there. I know Jill sent me pictures. I think it was last week. It was early last week. She sent me pictures at her. She stays between two houses. There's the house from her childhood or her youth that she inherited from her mother. And then there's the house she lives in with her significant other. And I can't remember which house it is, but it has a driveway with some trees. And she sent me just beautiful New England, trees, leaves changing, beautiful, blue sky. It was the greatest picture. We've had, I think it was because of that last chunk of really bad rain we had. Our leaves have gone from green to brown and just fallen off. And I think that it's if I remember correctly, what I've read for the leaves on the trees to be so beautiful, you have to have the rain at just the right time. And then you have to have some dry weather, and then the leaves can do their thing. I could be totally wrong about that, but that's what I think I read. So anyway, 70 quilts on display from artists from all over the world. That's a lot of quilts. That's awesome. Oh man, I hope you'll be able to take pictures of everything inside too. I know some places don't love that, but we're always hopeful, right? So I have a few spooky things to show off, to talk about. So first of all, this is my ghost quilt. So this was probably the first quilt I ever intentionally collected. Not to say I didn't own quilts before this one, or old quilts. I did have a few old quilts, but this was the first truly ancient quilt I collected. No idea what the age is, but based on the quilting and the pattern, which I'll tell you what it is in a minute, it's old. I know that much. And it is in horrific condition. You can see. It's very threadbare. It's missing a whole corner. So I tried to figure this out for quite some time. Like, what is this motif here? Let me show it to you. I actually have a picture of it. Let's see, where's my other screen? Here we go. So this is a close-up of it. And it's a weird thing. It's got these little leaves here have this minuscule buttonhole stitch around them. And then these are, it's all applique, but they look more pieced in, these up here, these triangles. And then of course you have these stem-like things. They are stems, by the way, that are applique. For the longest time, I kept looking at this thing. I actually tried out some interesting little versions of this, what you see in green. And then one day, and I had it folded up for a really long time. I hadn't looked at it, and I pulled it out because I wanted to take some pictures. I really wanted to look at the little leaves here. This really tight, you can see it. Picture's not super, but it's a really, really, really tight buttonhole stitch. And you can see this quilt is in horrible condition. It's raggedy. Every little bit of it is raggedy. But the stitching in it is so, so fine. This was probably a very nice quilt at one time. So anyway, I have it down and I'm looking at it and I was like, oh my gosh, you fool. I figured out what this quilt is. It's a Carolina lily. And it was made with what is likely a fugitive red, is my guess. And so that's what you see I've outlined in orange. Those are, it's hard to tell if they're pieced in or not because they're so raggedy. I think that, so typically Carolina lilies will be like the 4 triangles. And they're pieced together, in kind of a spray. And then either applique or inset. These, I honestly think, these were just cut as this shape because there's no seams here. You should see seams here. And you don't. So these things were cut as just these 4, 4-pronged pieces. And then possibly inset in there or appliqued. So anyway, but like I said, these probably would have been red. Like this would have been a very popular look of like a red or pink. And a red and green quilt. You often see these. Could have been a different color, but from what I understand, surprisingly, these fugitive dyes that will just like run right out of the fabric, never to be seen again, were some reds. And I don't know if that any of the dyes on these, these fabrics contributed to the demise of this quilt. I think it was just washed and used to heck. My guess is when the fugitive dye happened, they washed it and the red just disappeared, or whatever color that was. It's quite likely that they went, well, crap. She spent so much time making this quilt and now you can't even see the flowers. So it probably became like just a use quilt, and that's why it's in such raggedy condition. I could be totally wrong about all of this, but this is my guess. So anyway, today I was thinking about this quilt and I was like, oh, it's perfect. It's a ghost quilt. So you have now seen a ghost quilt. Now, let us look at a vampire quilt. So, oh, my sweet. She does not like to wear a costume, let me tell you. This is why you saw the turtle in a costume, because the cat said, no, ma'am. I've tried. So, let us look at this quilt. This is a vampire quilt. Now you may be asking yourself, what? This doesn't look like vampires of anything. This is a bear's paw quilt, right? Well, the maker of this quilt was said to be a vampire. And I'm going to read you the story. So this was documented by the Rhode Island Quilt Documentation, and it is in that collection on the Quilt Index. If you would like to look at it, let me throw the link in the chat. So if you want to look at it while I look at it. So let's read about this. The Quilt Alliance wrote a piece about it. I think they wrote their piece a very long time ago. I think this was in 2013. Yeah, so they wrote about this in October 2013. So I'm going to skip some of the blog the blog post because it talks about Anne Rice too. So here's what they say. This bear's paw quilt was made by suspected vampire Mercy Lena Brown in the late 1800s. That's right. Mercy was believed to be a vampire by the townspeople. When Mercy died of consumption, which, if I remember correctly, is tuberculosis, right? Like her mother and sister before her, her brother began to get sick as well. Now we know tuberculosis is like highly contagious. So I guess some forms of it are highly contagious. Mercy's body was exhumed to see if she had blood in her heart, in which case she was a vampire and may be draining her brother of life. The quilt was documented by its owner in 1992 during the Rhode Island Quilt Documentation Project. So the Quilt Alliance asked the question, was Mercy found to be a vampire? So what do you guys think? Based on what you might know about medical science, even if it's just a little bit, do you think they found blood in Mercy's heart and said she was a vampire? Well, indeed, they did. So what happened is the heart was found to have blood. So her heart was removed and burned in the graveyard, and the ashes were mixed into a concoction that her brother drank. Ooh. And he died of consumption 3 months later. This is so horrible. But it's really a striking quilt she made. Poor Mercy. Not only to have died this way, but then, to have had this post-mortem, grave desecration, body desecration. I mean, how horrible. But her quilt was really pretty lovely, actually. And, it's this pinky color. My guess is maybe it's a double pink. And then all of these lovely dark blues, and it looks like probably some brown, some plaids. And then these strategically placed really dark blocks here. I thought it was really neat. So, beautiful quilt. Tragic story. Poor Mercy. All right, so let's look at a slightly happier Halloween quilt. So this one is a Baltimore Halloween, and it says it's a kit quilt. It was documented by the Alberta Quilt Study Society, so I think this is Canadian. Yes, Canada. And let's see. I don't remember seeing... It's interesting, the questions. I've scrolled through these a million times, and I don't know that I've ever read specifically every single piece of data they collect. I mean, we've got the birth date of the maker. We've got, place of birth, city, country, all that. Her marriage date. Wow. So, all of this. What was her occupation of her spouse? What was the name of her spouse? Who's her father's name? Where's her father from? I mean, there's a lot of data here. Ethnic tribal background. So, if you've got First Nation people, quilts, there's all kinds of info in here. So, still looking to see. It just says kit. Keepsake Quilting Catalog. So, this must have been one of their kits. And it goes on and on. There's a lot of data in here. Let's see. So Baltimore Halloween, A Block of the Month by Pearl Pereira, hand quilted, hand appliqued and hand quilted by Suzanne Stranks, Cochrane, Alberta, November 2009 to April 2013. So took her a little bit of time to make this, which, I mean, it's a Baltimore album quilt, so we'll just look at it. So I thought this was really charming. So you've got the wreath type things, which are, you know, very, very Baltimore album-ish. Let's see, can I, it doesn't let me zoom in any further. You got the witch, you got this cool wreath made of cat heads and witch hats. I thought this was great. You've got like candy and leaves and ghosts, all kinds of things. And I mean, think about what you see on Baltimore album quilts. You see urns, you see baskets, and all of this stuff the designer has used. So I thought this was really clever. And I mean, she's got all the fall stuff in here. So very cute. Oh, and then the border. Look at the bats in the border. Ah, so cute. So I will put the link to this one if you'd like to take a look. And just a heads up, if you don't search the Quilt Alliance very often, the Quilt Index very often, it's a little slow. It's churning through a lot of data. So always be sure to give it a few minutes. Okay, so the next one is called Marianne Retires. And this is not specifically a Halloween quilt, but it has a Halloween block in it that I think is very charming. So I had a hard time like kind of quite understanding all the beginning stuff, so I had to scroll down to the data about the quilt. So 2 people actually worked on this. So they say that some of the important features about the quilt is behind each front story block is a scarf relating to the front block. And for instance, Halloween has an orange block with black images. A cityscape block relating to 9/11 has a scarf of a map of New York. So she's talking about like scarves or handkerchiefs or bandanas. And I think in here she says they collect them. Yes. So Sue and I use scraps of fabrics. Both of us were handkerchief collectors. We decided each block had to have a female figure, handkerchief skirt. We'll look in a minute. They're pretty cool. Beading embellishments, 3D find, etc. So Marianne is one of the makers, and then Sue is the other maker. Let's see. Oh, and this quilt has been shown a lot of places, and I think it has won some awards. Yeah, so I won't read all these, but lots of dates here. I see 2004, 2005, lots of 2006. Let's see. It won a first prize award in the Pennsylvania National Quilt Extravaganza. Oh, this is the one where I really noticed. The maker was a librarian. I love that. So many librarians in the quilt world. They get it, right? Her religious affiliation, Roman Catholic. It's so funny. All this info they ask. So before we look at the Halloween block, let's look at the details. So you see what she means. They've taken these handkerchiefs. I mean, just, cute hankies and scarves and things, and have made the skirts for these women, or the woman, Marianne. And let's see, close that one. I mean, look at this. Isn't that cute? This one, she's got a bunny on a leash. That was so adorable. Her little umbrella. She's got a duck on a leash too. And then this cute little skirt. And look how they've beaded in here. They mentioned the bead embellishments. Just adorable. I mean, just so cute and clever. Let's see. This one, it's blowing in the wind. There's a balloon. And this one, I think, shows the back. Yeah. So this is the back of the quilt. So they not only use the handkerchiefs for the skirts, they've put them together on the back to make the backing of the quilt. So you can see, I think this one, I can't tell what that one is. I thought that might be Halloween, but no, Halloween is right here, I think. Anyway, very cute stuff. So let's look at the Halloween block, because I think this quilt is just so charming. I don't think I can zoom in any further, unfortunately, but, oh no, I can. Here we go. Ah, yay! So this one is the Halloween block. And I absolutely love what they've done with making each of the blocks, this black border that kind of just, sets the content of the block off. And so this Halloween one is very Halloween-y looking, right? It's so cute. And you see she's wearing a witch hat, and she's got this black and white hanky as her skirt, and this little Halloween bucket. So cute. And a little shawl or something. So I just love this one. It was so charming, not just because the Halloween block was so cute, but also all of this other stuff in here. The way they've manipulated these little, pieces of fabric, what a hanky looks like, and manipulated them into skirts. Just so adorable. And here's the one, like the St. Patrick's Day one. She's standing by, like a Celtic cross. I guess that, was there a Valentine's? I don't know that there's necessarily a Valentine's one, but yeah. So very cute. Now, the next one is this. Now, I don't know why. So it's a Drunkard's Path quilt. I don't know why, but she named it Drunkard's Oath. So I'm not sure if that must have some significance. I don't think there's any super like Halloween-ness about this quilt, just that it's black and orange, and I believe that people called it her Halloween quilt, or she called it her Halloween quilt. Yes, the quilter calls this her Halloween quilt, and her name is Ruby, I think. Let's see, I know based on her birth date, if I remember yesterday looking at it, so 1922. She's probably not still with us. So anyway, her name is Ruby Riles, or Ruby Riles, I think. So she was from Louisiana. So look at this close. It's got this interesting brown border, and then I love what she did with the Drunkard's Path block here to make this border, so that it does this kind of scallopy thing. And then the Drunkard's Path blocks themselves here in black and orange are really cool. So I thought that one was super neat too. Did I give you guys, let's see. I don't know that I gave you guys the links to these two if you want to look at them. Yeah. So this was Marianne's quilt, or Marianne Retires, and then the black and orange one. Okay. Now, the last quilt we'll look at, and I'm going to read another portion of a post, and I'll give you this post as well if you want to read along. This is from Quilt Folk, and this is from their blog. They call this their journal entries. And this quilt, this is actually a reproduction of the quilt. Hey, Mama's a fan. So good to see you. Happy Halloween. So this is a reproduction of the graveyard quilt, and it was made, well, I'll need to read it to you. But this is the reproduction of it. The original quilt, and I don't know, let's see, I don't think they really have a super picture of the original. They have it laid out on a table here. But you can see it's an old quilt. It is in Louisville, I think. It's in Kentucky. I know that much. The actual town, okay, is it in the Frankfurt? Okay, it's in the Frankfurt Museum, which might actually not be in Louisville. It might be just outside of Louisville. So there was a trip, a seminar in Louisville, Kentucky, 2023. I was actually there. I did not go on this tour though. So, I'm kind of bummed I didn't get to see it. However, the people that went said it was absolutely amazing. And so, then this person, let's see, this is Hollis Taylor. She made this reproduction. So I'm going to read you a little bit of the, what was written about this. And this, again, is in the Quilt Folk Journal. And I think did I put the link in there already? I think I did. Yeah. And this piece was written by Meg Cox. And hopefully you subscribe to her newsletter. She's a fantastic writer. She used to be a journalist, so super writer. And let me read what she says. So this was made in Kentucky in 1843. Now, again, we're looking at a reproduction of it, not the actual quilt. But the actual quilt was made in 1843 by a grieving mother named Elizabeth Roseberry Mitchell. This quilt depicts a graveyard in the center, complete with a picket fence topped with climbing roses. Within the cemetery are 4 coffins, each labeled with a family member's name, with additional coffins sewn along the bottom border. When a family member died, the year of their death would be written on the coffin next to their name, and the coffin was moved to the center of the cemetery. And then she goes on to say, although mourning quilts were commonplace in the 19th century, this one by Mitchell is extraordinary. Mourning quilts have included tombstones, but don't usually feature coffins or a cemetery, let alone a plan to move the former into the latter. So she would literally have to unstitch the little coffins and move them into the cemetery. Although I kind of have a suspicion that there were already some people deceased in the family when she made the quilt. So I think maybe it's just these 2 spots where she had to unstitch. I think maybe. I'm skipping some of this. The Kentucky Historical Society in Frankfort. Okay, so Frankfort, Kentucky is where it's at the Kentucky Historical Society. They actually own Abraham Lincoln's pocket watch as well. Which fascinating, but I'd rather see this quilt than Abraham's pocket watch. They don't display this often. The curator said, it's fragile. It's a very fragile quilt. But the curator said that school kids call it creepy when they come to see it. But it is, in 12 years, it has only been displayed twice, and for a short period of time each time. So like 3 months each time it's been shown, because again, it's fragile. So she writes about, American Quilt Study Group going to see it. And let's see. So Sandra Starley, who I know, she is a member of AQSG. She's a historian, quilt appraiser. She's also an attorney. It's always fun to find out what people's other lives are like outside of quilt study. But she says that seeing this quilt up close was a true goosebump moment. It is one of the most iconic American quilts, such a clear manifestation of grief, hope, and beauty. And its fans aren't just quilt history nerds. So this was donated by a Mitchell family member, a descendant. And so what the family has said is she made the top after the death of her son, John, at age 2, sewing on a coffin and embroidering his name and death date, 1836. A few years later, a second son named Matthias, nicknamed Bub, died at 19, and she added a coffin with his name underneath. In 1840, she and her husband and her children moved to Kentucky. Using some of the same fabric, she began making a new mourning quilt. That one now owned by the Historical Society in Frankfort. She was driven to make mourning quilts with explicit coffins because of her dear boys were buried back in Ohio and she couldn't visit their graves. So that's kind of what this was about. And then, like I said, Hollis Taylor then made a reproduction of it. And from what I will let you, if you guys want to read more about this, go and check it out, because Hollis Taylor was also going through a time in her life. I think when her data was she was getting divorced, and she wanted a project. She needed a project that kind of, she could put some emotion into. She got a picture of this quilt and literally used a magnifying glass to look into the quilt and try to match the fabrics. So her goal was to make her quilt look like the original as much as possible. So, yes, it is very unusual and fascinating, Mama. This quilt is, again, I wish I had been able to see it, although the field trip I went on was pretty cool. So, and we got to see dozens of quilts, not just this one. the group that went to see this quilt, I think this was like in the morning, and then they went to another place in the afternoon, if I remember correctly, but they got like 30 minutes with it. So they got to stand around and look at it. But yeah, it's fascinating. And there was also a quilt I was looking for that, it's a modern quilt, and it's kind of similar in the sense that it uses these little coffin-like shapes. And it is documenting, people making, migrants crossing from Mexico into the U.S. and the number of people that die in the desert. And it's documenting that. And I want to say I saw the quilt in like 2016. So it predates COVID and was made quite some time ago, but I couldn't find it last night, and because I can't remember the name of it. I know I took pictures of it, but I'll run across it at some point and be able to let you guys know what it's called. But yeah, so happy Halloween. There are some spooky quilts, some weird quilts, and then of course my ghost quilt. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. So yeah, that's what I had for Halloween. I went out looking for Halloween quilts, like I said, and I knew about the vampire quilt. I'd heard about that one before. I knew about this quilt. And then I found the others, just, I typed in Halloween, like what is there, on the quilt index for Halloween. So yeah. And I decided I didn't want to do like the cutesy, there's lots of really cutesy Halloween stuff out there. Especially now you can find all kinds of adorable quilt patterns. A friend has made a sunbonnet Sue, a Halloween sunbonnet Sue, where, they're kind of witchy, but they're Sues. It's so adorable. She showed me a picture of it when I saw her at a seminar. And I wish I had a picture of that. I forgot about it and meant to reach out to her and didn't get a chance. So maybe we'll do Halloween 2 at some point. So to get on to our next thing, I think we're going to read more about women's education today, which is no joke and is not scary. So we're going to jump back into the Lady of Godey's. And if you remember, this is Sarah Josepha Hale is the Lady of Godey's, and the book was written by Ruth Finley. And we are getting into the home stretch, you guys. I felt like this dragged on for a while because, I had shows where we didn't read. So I'm excited to jump back in this. All right. So this is a chapter 14, and it's called Companionate Education. So we know the last chapter was about Vassar and all of her involvement there, which started off with, and I go back to the fact that Ruth Finley has, she was a journalist. She has this way of just the turn of phrase, often run on sentences that make me crazy. But the way she tells a story, I really love. So instead of just saying Vassar, is it Matthias Vassar or Matthew Vassar? I can't remember. Mr. Vassar. She was friendly with him, got to know him, never met him in person though. But she was really important to Vassar. He really valued her opinion. But the chapter started off talking about the fact that she was instrumental in getting female removed from Vassar's name. So it used to be Vassar Female College. And she was like, no, it's a women's college. It is not female. Female doesn't necessarily mean a human woman. Female can mean a cow is a female bovine. A ewe is a female sheep. So, with her mindset of we are not just the female of a species, we are women, and we demand the opportunities at education. So I thought it was really interesting how she started that chapter off, and I just love it. So see how this one goes. So as a reminder, we are reading The Lady of Godey's, Sarah Josepha Hale by Ruth Finley, and this is chapter 14, Companionate Education. For one who would compile an unabridged history of the beginning and rise of women's education in the United States, the data is at hand in the files of the Ladies' Magazine and Godey's Ladies' Book. From dame school to female seminary to women's college to state university, the story is there, a story as minute as the roster of a regiment, that inarticulate list of private soldiers who endure the thick of battle, but to whom, when fallen, is given no individual glory in the victory. Well, that's a turn of phrase. Good grief. So with the first educational institutions for girls and those who sponsored them, few are the early leaders now remembered, few the schools. Mount Holyoke started as a seminary, became a college, and as such vigorously survives. Oberlin, beginning as a collegiate institute that offered a ladies' course, is now, to practical intents, a university. Antioch, despite its limited growth, it remains one of the smaller schools, continues as higher education's experimental laboratory. So Mount Holyoke, Oberlin, I mean, these are, and Antioch, I'm not sure where that one is, but I'm assuming it remains a smaller school today. But I mean, these are very well-known universities or colleges. There are other institutions still operating whose doors were open to women before 1860, a few. And I remember Robin, I think, brought up the other day that Wesleyan is it in Georgia? I think. Wesleyan was the first to admit women, whereas Vassar was the first for women. And then she went on, of course, to talk about these like lesser educational opportunities. Okay, thank you. Antioch College is in Yellow Springs, Ohio. So these lesser, they're kind of like finishing schools. So they were like the lesser educational opportunities for women. They were, they taught sewing, they taught manners. They didn't necessarily teach like hardcore intellectual stuff. Whereas, Vassar was right up there, supposed to be right up there with, Harvard and Yale. They were teaching like, really important. Not to say that sewing is important. I think it is. But, from the collegiate standpoint, it's something that, that we're looking at languages and hard sciences and that kind of thing. So, and there are names of early advocates of female education, still familiar, a few. But when Emma Willard, Catherine Beecher, Mary Lyon, and Horace Mann have been listed, who else is well remembered? Here and there, Elmira H. Lincoln Phelps might stir a memory. But who ever heard of Catherine Fisk, Lydia S. English, Henry Jones, Dr. and Mrs. J.W. Cook, and hundreds of others written of in Godey's as heads of the first schools for young women? Schools, some of them enrolling as many as 100 pupils, bent on acquiring a finished and polite education. A polite education. Their most widely conned textbook... Their most closely conned textbook seems to have been Wayland's Moral Science. Oh, that sounds interesting. A book of essays dealing with such subjects as the nature and defects of natural religion, happiness, and reciprocity. After each chapter, Wayland's propounded a series of questions ranging from, if I hire a house for a year and a new street is opened, which renders it twice as valuable before the close of the year, am I obliged to pay more rent? Well, that's an interesting question. To, how do you know that God did not intend you to eat the leaves of the apple tree instead of the fruit? Inquiring minds want to know. I'm thinking Wayland's Moral Science is a book full of garbage. Okay, so Antioch College is a private liberal arts college in Yellow Springs, Ohio, founded in 1850 by Christian Connection. The college began operating in 1852 as a non-sectarian institution. Political and education reformer Horace Mann was its first president. Well, I have certainly heard of Horace Mann. But not enough to know that he was the first president of Antioch College. Now I know. I've learned many things this week. Okay. Oh, God did not intend you to eat the leaves of the apple instead of the fruit. Okay. Of such instruction and of the purveyors thereof, what need now be said? Only this, that here was offered first trials in the great experiment out of which have grown the schools that constitute today's system of higher education for women. Now remember, this is 1931 when she wrote this book. But honestly, I don't think a whole lot has changed necessarily. I mean, college is a little bit of a fraught situation in terms of tuition, etc. A lot of colleges and universities have been under fire in our modern times. But I think there's a lot of what she's saying here is, we're not hopefully not reading Wayland's Moral Science anymore, but these things are still true of higher education. Catherine Fiske, according to Godey's for January 1837, founded her Young Ladies' Seminary in Keene, New Hampshire in 1814. So this would have been one of those ladies' seminaries that did not teach the hard sciences. So it was known as the oldest institution of its kind in New England, and we believe in the United States. Lydia English, a lady possessed of an ample fortune and devoted to the work of improving her own sex, maintained a female seminary at Georgetown, Washington, D.C., in the early 30s, the first, said Godey's, to be even partially endowed. That's fascinating. I had no idea that Georgetown had a female seminary, but, it's D.C. Being subsidized, Miss English's school was not subjected to all the ups and downs, mostly downs, that were the fate of the female educational institutions of the period. The Georgetown Catalog for 1835 gave the number of pupils as 130, an unusual enrollment for those days, with 9 teachers in attendance besides the principal. So 100 students, 9 teachers. That's what, 10 students per teacher? A little more than 10 students per teacher. Dr. and Mrs. Cook established the Westchester Young Ladies Seminary in Pennsylvania in 1838. I have been to Westchester very recently. Here, Elmira Phelps, sister of Emma Willard, taught, finally becoming principal. Here she wrote more than one of her widely used textbooks, among the first dealing with intermediate subjects. So we're getting away from being pretty and sewing and getting into math and languages and science. The Reverend Henry Jones, was the owner and principal during the 30s and 40s of the Greenfield High School for young ladies, the term high school being synonymous in those days with boarding or finishing school. Though this institution was not as large as Miss English's, it enjoyed an erudite reputation, for Reverend Mr. Jones's wife was none other than the amiable, intelligent, and accomplished daughter of the celebrated Dr. Noah Webster of dictionary fame. Still, her name seems not to have been joined with her husband's as co-manager of the school. This neglect incensed the lady editor of Godey's, who did indeed marvel that Mr. Jones has not associated his wife's name with his own. She marveled on 2 counts. First, because of the man's selfishness in withholding credit where credit was due, since his wife really was the directing head and inspiration of the school. And secondly, because it should be known publicly that there is a lady responsible for the domestic habits, social happiness, moral discipline, health, and manners of the young ladies. But the learning is to be acquired in such schools. Even in Emma Willard's at Troy, which for many years held highest rating for scholastic standards, it was there, it will be recalled, Mrs. Hale sent her own daughters. It was by no means the lady editor's idea of an education. Long before Mrs. Willard opened her first classes at Middlebury, Vermont, Sarah Buell was sharing with her own pupils at Newport, New Hampshire, the benefits derived from her studies with her brother. A college training encompassing the same subjects Horatio Buell had been privileged to pursue at Dartmouth. That was what his sister envisioned from the beginning for women. No sex in education was her motto. That's funny. In the very first number of her ladies' magazine, she began her campaign to reduce the ideal of that motto to fact. Here, in January 1828, now you remember, this was before she was with Godey's Ladies Book. She was writing, the Ladies Magazine was her own publication, specifically like in the Boston area, I think. So January 1828, it is to be found is to be found a review of an address on the subject of women's education delivered by a now forgotten divine, the argument of whose discourse was based on the powerful moral influence women hold over their children at the period of infancy and childhood. This the new editor seized upon as the most liberal statement of the times, hopefully observing that had any one 10 years ago calculated on the improvements that there had been made in female education, he would have been thought an extravagant visionary. Our legislators, she went on, have not yet been disposed to establish colleges and endow professorships for the instruction of girls, but much, very much has been done through individual enterprise. The much accomplished in 1828 was the difference between no schools for girls and painfully inadequate ones. How far public officials were from granting state support to higher education for women is best evidenced by the fact that the first Boston high school admitting girl students, opened about this time, was closed after only 18 months for the reason that it became so overcrowded as to prove impractical, the authorities refusing to extend either its physical accommodation or teaching facilities. Oh, we got to shut this down. All the girls are flocking here. We're not going to give them more teachers or more chairs to sit in. Such then were the conditions of that background, the lady editor's 50 years of striving for the advancement of education, particularly women's education. The major objects of her long advocacy were 4. School and college opportunities for girls equal to those granted boys. Abolishment of corporal punishment. Employment of women as teachers. Remember, she worked really hard for that at Vassar. Government aid of teachers' training schools. The first, of course, was the fundamental of Mrs. Hale's cause, but here at the start it was necessary to walk warily. Laws of state and church alike gave man control over women, physically, economically, spiritually. As already noted, one of the ladies' magazine's first protests was aimed at denial of property rights to married women. And while wife-beating and the forcible governance of grown women had come to be frowned on among the more intelligent, still the word obey in the marriage ceremony was used literally. Men ruled their households according to their own temperaments. Wives as long as they survived, daughters until they were married, sons until they became of age. And so Mrs. Hale's earliest arguments for the cultivation of women's mind, ventured only to elaborate those advanced by the liberal clergymen who wanted women educated on the ground of motherhood, a phase of the subject she continued to emphasize in all sincerity as long as she lived. But what she really desired, to be sure, was that women be educated for woman's own sake. So I guess at this point, this kind of stinks. Some of the men the clergymen who are advocating for women to be educated, it was really just because they spent so much time with their children. And they did not want a dumb woman raising children. A woman should be educated enough to properly raise her children. I think that's the sentiment there. And so she's saying, why can't I be educated for my own sake, not just because I have to make my children smarter? With all her heart, she believed in feminine, as well as masculine, right to those enjoyments and appreciations which only an enlightened and stimulated intellect can bring. Awareness of the personal satisfactions they were missing, of what an education means to an individual, just as an individual, she was eager to bring home to women. But how proceed? In 1828, she would only have harmed her cause, antagonizing women as well as men, by basing a proposal so revolutionary on the rights of women. The obvious course, as in the instance of the prospectus with which she had launched her Boston magazine, was to present the question from the angle of the benefits to be reaped by man. So yeah, you got to convince the men, like, this is what's in it for you, buddy. Confessions of a Husband appeared in the Ladies' Magazine in November 1828, written supposedly by a gentleman, but with a phraseology and style so coinciding with the lady editor's own as to leave little doubt as to the real authorship. How often she probably wrote these BS under these BS names. At the time, though, authenticity of the confessing husband was unquestioned. The early 19th century was not cynical in matters of print, accepting all publication at face value.
Husband, to let the gentleman speak for himself, had no companion in my wife. The female he had married, being uneducated and consequently unable to take an interest in intellectual pursuits, could not understand the aspirations of his superior masculine soul. Oh my God. Therefore, the confessor, though untempted to violate morality as expressed in the 10th commandment, could not but observe how much happier was his neighbor who had espoused brains, educated brains. Furthermore, his neighbor's wife was pretty, amiable, an excellent housekeeper, an exceptional mother, and full of good works. Her education, in short, had not hurt her a bit, and man had evolved to the point where he needed mental companionship. Husband was a defrauded, forlorn, disillusioned, and desolate male. So this is how she's so crafty. She, picks this BS like husband person to write, and then she puts on this nonsense that, some like, oh, my wife's a dummy. The guy next door's got a smart wife. I may be coveting what my neighbor has. I mean, that's very crafty of her to, she was really working it. And how remedy his plight? Woman must be educated. For man's sake, she must add mental pursuits to her other duties, if she would become an adequate companion. Again, I mean, as much as this makes me, yes, Drew would barf. It's still, again, she's crafty. She knows she's meeting them where they're at. Because you push too hard on people. You're trying to make major social change. People push back. But if you get in there and you get crafty in their minds, she's writing under this nom de plume as this husband. Very, very crafty. I like that. And when she had attained the felicity of learning already acquired by man, she would not regret the time and energy spent in hours of study that might at first seem dull. It was a trick, of course. A trick as cheap, at least in its form, as the more recent newspaper features of Helen and Warren and Confessions of a Wife fame. But it worked. It broke through centuries of masculine prejudice at a time when preachments of justice for women could but lose. And it pierced through the mental lackadaisicalness of women themselves. It was good psychology, excellent strategy, the acme of shrewd the acme of shrewd editorship. Once the idea of the masculine advantage of female education was planted, the confessions as such ceased. But the argument was too humanly effective to be dropped, and through the years, Mrs. Hale made it peculiarly her own. She flattered man into educating woman. The time came, of course, when she was able to speak boldly of the educational rights of women as individuals, though that was only after years of discussion had made the subject too familiar to her groping public for it to be frightened even by an allopathic dose. By mid-century, she dared write, "Better leave the boys of a generation without learning than the girls. If one sex must be doomed to ignorance," while by the time the Civil War was over, she was declaiming, "What has made this nation great? Not its heroes, but its households. There are now probably in this country 6 millions of homes containing over 40 millions of inhabitants. At the present rate of increase, there will be in 1900 100 millions. The future of the country depends upon the training of its children. Woman has the citizen from the first, working not only for the present generation, but for the countless millions that will fill in the continent, and her influence will go on ever broadening and deepening with the future of the nation." She didn't win any friends during the Civil War, and I think probably, not its heroes but its households, probably rubbed some people wrong. To supplement her own writings in support of the cause of women's education, the lady editor opened the pages of her magazine to practical educators. Month after month in the early years are to be found articles by Emma Willard, by Catherine Beecher, by scores of men and women influential then, though forgotten now. Any school for girls was assured space in Godey's Ladies' Book by the mere act of mailing the editor a catalog. The book's list of schools for girls, schools long since vanished, and where else recorded, must be fairly complete. Certainly, it is surprisingly long. So that's a research opportunity right there. If you get your hands on some Godey's Ladies reprints or something, you too can find all of the girls' schools in 18 whatever. But Mrs. Hale's supportive educators, whose work she recognized as likely to prove lasting, did not stop with presentation of their educational views. Certainly the blue stocking would prove a bugbear, easily so in the normalcy-loving mid-19th century. So the lady editor took care to let her readers know that feminine enthusiasts for learning were not necessarily one-sided cranks. Mrs. Willard was presented not only as an educator, but as a writer of verse. Some of it, by the way, good enough to win a lasting place in the language. Witness the still familiar Rocked in the Cradle of the Deep. It's not still familiar now, sorry. And Catherine Beecher contributed really charming essays, less stilted in style than was common with the writing of the times. One especially pleasing to the motor-transported age that has come to love horses for themselves rather than their service was called The Chivalry of Horses. It began with the question, "Did you ever ride on horseback?" and went on to relate anecdotes about a span named Music and Dancing, on which Catherine learned to ride at the age of 10, and about Prince, Pirate, Charlie, and Peter, who would take to trotting in such a style that it was special interposition whenever the rider happened to hit the saddle. These were the animals that served the members of Lyman Beecher's great family before the coming of Miss Catherine's Rollo, my beautiful Rollo, who, if there be a land where the spirits of thy race depart, art coursing its bright fields, the fleetest, the noblest, and the best. Ah, the lady loved her horse. One wonders what her stern old Calvinistic father had to say about so unorthodox a suggestion as a horse heaven. Horse heaven! It's over the Rainbow Bridge, you know. Incidentally, this little essay throws a happier light on the eldest sister of Henry Ward Beecher and Harriet Beecher Stowe. For biographers of the more famous Henry and Harriet have pictured Catherine as unsympathetic and austere like her father, patriarchal Lyman, who, as it seems, never spoiled a child by sparing the rod. Oh my gosh. Yes, Drew, and I was just thinking of you. I know you love horses, so I certainly hope there's a horse heaven as well. To this old saw, most parents adhered long after the Beecher family was grown, but the beating of children was a custom Mrs. Hale early deplored. By 1844, she was carrying on in Godey's a systematic campaign for the rights of children. Remember, she's a big proponent for kindergarten and early education, which she could still proclaim in March for 1860. Our book has always advocated. Great mother as well as great editor, she was among the first to advise against corporal punishment in the home and to insist that it be prohibited in schools. I mean, my elementary school had paddles hanging on the wall. So, I mean, this is more than 100 years before that. She's talking about no corporal punishment in schools. Nothing can be more absurd in theory and vile in practice than the attempt in common parlance to break the temper, and crush the will, while of all debasing, degrading influences, the worst is bodily fear. Sickening stories of the cruelty of unrestrained schoolmasters found their way into Godey's, for the lady editor was not one to mince words once the facts of an abuse were established. Either a wave of intensified cruelty to children swept the country just after the Mexican War, or the public suddenly became conscience-stricken, for more than one publication of the Times hinted at gruesome happenings. But Godey's did more than hint. It printed facts under the signatures of men and women whose integrity could not be questioned. A report by Lewis Gaylord Clark gives a vivid picture of schoolroom conditions prevalent for long. His, meaning the schoolmaster's, floggings were almost incessant, wrote Mr. Clark in January 1851, going on to describe, Oh, this is terrible. The ferruling of a young boy on the tops of his fingernails. So I'm guessing it's the edge of the ruler being whacked across this little kid's fingers. A refinement of cruelty which caused, well, I should probably have done a trigger alert here, a trigger warning. A refinement of cruelty which caused the little fellow's nails to turn black and soon come off. Oh, God, that's awful. Perhaps the abuse of children, as revealed in the lady's book, brings home more forcibly than any other thing the lack of fellow feeling that's still obtained in mid-19th century America. It was the same evil Dickens was striving to correct in England, but sanguine historians on this side of the Atlantic had been loath to admit that comparable conditions existed for decades in our own land of the free. I mean, my gosh, the corporal punishments in schools probably like the least of these children's worries. If we remember, as we're ramping up into the Industrial Revolution here in the 1800s, children were working in factories. Children, I was flipping through something the other day and I saw, I'm trying to think, I think it was a book I got recently, and I was flipping through and they showed a picture of a child and she was interviewed and they asked her, how old are you? And she's like, I don't remember. And she's this tiny little girl working in a weaving factory, like a mill. It's nice when they started letting children have a childhood in the 20th century, right? In 1845, Sarah Hale was insisting that children should be placed in charge of primary schools, if for no other reason than that their native feminine patience and understanding of children would preclude bodily forms of punishment. The first requisite of a teacher, she said, was the patience of Job, the wisdom of Solomon, the loving spirit of the beloved disciple, and the energy of Paul. A combination of virtues she vaguely hoped was more likely to be found in the historically disciplined nature of woman than the aggressive temperament of man. And so here, this is a plate from Godey's, one of the engravings used by Mrs. Hale in support of her female education campaign. And this says maternal instructions. So it looks like a mama teaching her children something. So, cat. I'm not sure. I don't think you can see him. He's not on camera, but he's skulking around. So this is one of the engravings. Dude. Okay. A decade later, she was trying to interpret adolescent psychology to her smug Victorian public, which, having decreed repression for the adult self, wreaked the vengeance of its thwarted desires on helpless children. Let's see, Drew had said, a lot of people unfortunately had children for the sole purpose of having free labor. Yep. Why would they care if a factory treated them badly? Yeah. I mean, really, honestly, oh, hey, Kenny. I just realized they're here. I'm a long time no see, buddy. I hope you've been enjoying a sewing machine repair. I think it's maybe been a couple weeks, but I know I saw some gorgeous machines that you posted. Little children are always active, she pleaded. Lambs skip and bound. Kittens and puppies seem wild with the joy of life, and little children naturally run, leap, dance, and shout in the exuberance of that capacity for happiness which the young human heart feels as instinctively as the flower buds open to the sun. To repress their natural joyousness, not to direct and train it for good, seems to be the object of most parents. So the merry little children are subjected to a routine of quiet until this painful lesson is impressed that to be active is to be very naughty. Oh, congratulations! You made a sale. I love it. Was it to a collector or was it to somebody that wanted a machine to sew with? I always love that when you could get somebody interested in sewing or, give them the tools. Very, very cool. Hand in hand with such pleas as fathers and mothers, I beseech you, let it be your sacred duty to make home happy for your children, went Mrs. Hale's undeviating advocacy of women as teachers. Not only for the sake of children, but quite as much for the development and happiness of women themselves, the teaching profession, she believed, should be open to them. This campaign she started the moment she had an audience in the Ladies' Magazine in 1828. So guessing will be used. I don't see the T&S 626 is very collectible. Okay. There is no influence so powerful as that of the mother, she said then, but next in rank and efficacy is that of schoolmaster. Now the editress wishes to unite the perfection of these two characters with the name of woman. She believes that women are capable of the task, that the business of instruction, except in the very highest seminaries, might, with propriety, be committed to them, that it would be a profession suited to their talents, congenial to their character, and appropriate to their station. In 1828, according to Mrs. Hale, not one teacher in 50 publicly employed was a woman. For that matter, public schools in the present day sense scarcely existed. In 1827, Massachusetts had passed a law attempting to compel every community of 500 inhabitants or over to maintain a school higher than primary grade. Buddy, come on. Go on now. But there was such opposition to this levying on public funds, and the law was far from operating when the first women's magazine was started. And of course, of normal schools there were none in all the land. It is doubtful if at that time the idea of a training school for teachers had even been thought of. Yes, this is my son's child. Still, the first 10 years of Mrs. Hale's advocacy of women teachers was highly productive. Though not alone in her championship, she was leader of the movement, and so effective were her efforts that in 1839, when the first normal school in the country was opened, it was for girls. She told the story in Godey's for October. Some 2 or 3 years ago, the sum of $10,000 was given by an individual for the purpose of founding normal schools in the state, meaning Massachusetts. Massachusetts is not a state, by the way, it's a commonwealth, provided the legislature would give a like sum. This was done, and the first normal school was opened at Lexington a few weeks since for female teachers. Note the italics and exclamation point. So, female teachers, exclamation point. There is soon to be another normal school for males, but the precedence has, for once, been given in the walks of science to woman. Even so, the spread of the normal school was slow. In 1851, Mrs. Hale offered, through the Ladies' Book, a humble petition to Congress to set aside 3 or 4 million acres of the public national domains for the endowment of at least one normal school in every state for the gratuitous education of female teachers. This petition was finally incorporated in a bill which Godey's kept, however vainly, before the public for years. From time to time, the statistics cited in its support were revised. Thus, while the 1851 need for teachers was placed at 20,000, the presentation for January 1863 cited 60,000 as necessary to solve the problem of the more than 2 millions of children in our country destitute of the opportunities of education. And the suggested endowment had grown to 10 million acres of land. Such an endowment was not without precedent, nor was the acreage sought other than modest when compared to the vast tracts of land Congress had donated to the various states for the purpose of establishing agricultural schools for men. Mrs. Hale's sense of justice saw no reason why like endowments should not furnish like facilities for the benefit of women. Her appeal to the 40th Congress of the United States, published in Godey's for December 1868, strikingly illustrates how slow a growth America's school system was to prove. It reads in part, "An appeal is once more made to the members of our national legislature on behalf of the women of our country who are engaged in the duties of public education. The munificent donations of public lands given by Congress for the establishment of agricultural colleges has been appropriated entirely for the benefit of young men. This may have been in accordance with the intention of the law, but if so, it leaves an important act of justice to be done. By common consent in our country, the office of teacher of children has come to be held as peculiarly proper for women. Note that Mrs. Hale was not given to gloating over victories achieved. It is a noteworthy fact that the older a state becomes and the more widely education is diffused in it, the more general is the employment of women as teachers. Thus, in Illinois in 1862, there were 7,381 women engaged in teaching and 7,713 men, the numbers being nearly equal. But in the state of New York, in the same year, the number of women so engaged was 18,915 against only 7,585 men. Wow, that's more than almost 3 times as many women as men in New York. It's interesting to see, and how much Sarah Hale, obviously she had a major influence on this, but she's pivotal, but she's not like the sole cause of this. But think about turn of the century. As you get into the 20th century, in the 70s and 80s, I did not have male teachers until I was in high school. I'm mentally running through middle school. I had male teachers as my gym teacher in middle school. So you have such a shift over 120 some years time, taking into considering my lifetime. But just thinking about early 20th century, the pioneers, they were always like sending some woman to start the little schoolhouse, even though I know there were men teachers then too. But it's like such a flip, going from, an entirely male profession, even though it was not extensive, to mostly women teaching young children. The profession of teacher requires as thorough and special training as that of any of the other intellectual professions. The great majority of our teachers are deficient in this training. The complaint on this head is indeed universal, and it is coupled with another complaint of the inadequate salaries almost everywhere paid to teachers, but more especially in rural districts. The State Commissioner for Ohio, in his report for 1866, says, over 1/3 of the teachers employed in the district schools are themselves mere boys and girls, being under 20 years of age. I know I've heard so many stories of, manifest destiny, all these people, set up some schools for their kids, and you end up with, girls who are like 18 and they just graduated from the little school themselves, and now they're teaching the children. The labors of these youthful and inexperienced teachers are largely experimental and are therefore necessarily detrimental to the public interest in no inconsiderable extent. It is to redress these admitted and most serious evils that the national aid is now solicited. Women already compose 2/3 of the whole number of persons engaged throughout our country teaching youth. It is a duty which our lawmakers owe to their country to see that these educators are properly trained. But originally, the appeal had been made on quite different grounds. Very far from 2/3 of the country's teaching staff were women then. In her memorial to the 1853 to 1854 Congress, Mrs. Hale had said the following: while the Great West, California, and the wide ocean invite young men to wealth and adventure, and while the labors of the schoolroom offer so little recompense or honor, the 20,000 teachers needed cannot be obtained from their ranks, and therefore the young women of our country must become teachers of the common schools, or these must be given up. It's interesting that she's saying, the labors of the schoolroom offer so little recompense or honor. Do we not say the same thing about our teachers today? They are not paid enough, and often they are the subject of disrespect. I have numerous teachers in my family and friends who are teachers or former teachers, and over COVID they were like, we are second-class citizens. It is not good. It's pretty wild. One might think of the discovery of gold in California could have little influence on the destiny of women outside the home, but it was just that which gave large numbers of women their first chance at teaching, itself the first profession that opened its ranks to women. Many schools, especially in villages and country districts, were closed in 1849 for the precise reason that the call of the Great West sounded louder in the ears of the young men in charge of them than did the call to teach. Man, abandoning for a venture a profession of which he had long been jealous, woman was allowed to step into the breach, a typically Victorian attitude all around. No review of the early struggle for educational facilities would be complete without mention of two private societies that played important parts in spreading learning beyond the Alleghenies, and which, in byproduct fashion, supplied wives to a large number of husky pioneers. So these two societies are called the Ladies' Education Society and the National Popular Education Society. The official organ of the former, the older of the two, was the Ladies' Book, which in its June 1846 number announced itself as authorized and ready to receive contributions, requests from communities desiring teachers, and applications from young ladies desiring to teach. By April 1849, the society, according to the book, had sent out from the eastern states to the west about 100 teachers. Within the last 2 years, the editor continued, this movement was begun, a movement which is of far more importance to the improvement, and we may add, the prosperity of our land than will be all the gold in California. To these societies that sent out teachers, much as religious organizations sent out missionaries, the pioneer West owed its educational beginnings. But this record can only skim the surface of the early Victorian struggle for universal education, as indeed it can catch but the highlights of Sarah Hale's own educational activities. She was not herself an educator in the strict sense, yet surely no woman ever did more for the cause. She made of her Ladies' Book a sounding board for the least stir in educational progress. Articles and editorials on the first trade schools, the first night schools, and the first school for the blind, the first school library, the endowment of Wells Seminary by the great expressman, I don't know what that means, the opening of Harvard University to women, the establishment of Sage College at Cornell, these only suggest the wealth of educational fact and encouragement disseminated by Godey's, which had come down in history as a fashion magazine. It was a fashion magazine in more senses than one. Surely it did much to make education fashionable, especially feminine education. Also, very crafty. You got a quote-unquote fashion magazine, but she is pushing some agendas really hard in there. And it is pleasant to know that the lady editor's labors in this particular did not go unrecognized. In 1860, the Baltimore Female College, which I am familiar with, for years one of the largest seminaries in the country, caused a special medal to be struck and presented to Mrs. Sarah Josepha Hale, editress of Godey's Ladies' Book, for her distinguished services in the cause of female education. Unfortunately, the female college is no longer there. I think it only lasted from like 1860 to 1899, maybe. I want to say it was gone by the late 1800s. It was Mrs. Hale's compelling belief in the paramountcy. Is that even a word? Ruth, the Turner phrase. So Mrs. Hale's compelling belief in the paramountcy of the need of education for women that prevented her being impressed by the suffrage agitation of her day. It is perhaps idle to speculate on what her attitude would be were she living now, but one may risk the guess that in 1920, when the 19th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, she would have felt votes for women warranted by the standards of feminine education at last achieved. But it is also likely she would not have been disappointed by any failure of suffrage quickly to alter women's status or the general complexion of political affairs. Here, she probably would have felt that the full benefits of suffrage could be reaped by both man and woman, only from an even broader casting of the seeds of knowledge. In any event, in her own day, she believed that the education of women as a whole was neither high enough nor wide enough to justify feminine enfranchisement. I'm not surprised it's a word, but who's going to pick that over A better word, a word that's a little easier to pronounce. So this is interesting. So in her opinion, she believed that education was not good enough for women yet to justify them being able to vote and take on more societal importance. That's interesting. But baby steps, right? Let education come first was her thought, and the ballot, if it proved necessary or wise for women to wield its power, would follow. And I will say, with a plea to all of the people in the United States, whether you are man or woman, please exercise your duty and your right to vote, as it is voting season. I think you have until Tuesday. Tuesday is actually voting day, but I think most states, probably all states, have adopted early voting. So, I don't get political, but I do strongly believe it is our freedom and our right. Therefore, it is our duty to vote. And if you don't vote, then I don't ever want to hear a complaint out of you. I said this to my son. He voted in his first election. He skipped the next one, and I said, I don't want to hear a darn thing from you about anything you think is unfair because you didn't vote. Off my soapbox. We have said little of the rights of women, she announced in the Lady's Book for January 1850, some 18 months after that first meeting, held in the pleasant home of Elizabeth Cady Stanton at Seneca Falls, New York, had started what was to become one of the world's great controversies. But her first right is to education in its widest sense, to such education as will give her the full development of all her personal, mental, and moral qualities. Having that, there will be no longer any question about her rights, and rights are liable to be perverted to wrongs when we are incapable of rightly exercising them. The Lady's Book, including the Boston Ladies Magazine, was the first avowed advocate of the holy cause of women's intellectual progress. It has been the pioneer in the wonderful change of public sentiment respecting female education and the employment of female talent in educating the young. We intend to go on, sustained and accelerated by this universal encouragement, till our grand aim is accomplished, till female education shall receive the same careful attention and liberal support from public legislation as are bestowed on that of the other sex. Such is the mission of the Lady's Book. If Godey's was unsympathetic towards women's rights as conceived by suffragists, at least it indulged in none of the ridicule so popular with its times, not only of the movement, but of the movement's leaders. And curiously, it was the lady editor herself, indifferent as she was to votes for women, who drove that entering wedge that gave women their first opportunity to demonstrate that they could serve usefully in public capacities. In February 1871, she published a long editorial headed Women on School Boards, in which she said, "There is one field of public life which women may well desire to occupy. There should be women on our school boards." I really think she's saying that, don't vote and advocate for yourself until you're educated enough to do so. And while I don't necessarily believe not everybody has, even today, access to wonderful, great education, and people can still be just as smart and, make good decisions. But I feel like there was a method to her madness. I feel like she was like chipping away at stuff. Let's get the women in there as teachers. Let's get them in there as principals. Let's get them in there on the school board. And then we move up this ladder. Maybe that was really not her necessarily like her conscious intent, but I feel like that was the method to her madness. Like chip, 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 chip. Good for you, Kennedy. Kennedy. Kenny. Man, I can't talk today. Good for you. Thank you for voting. Doing your duty. The cats wanted brushing. Yes. This fellow needs such care as well. All right. We're almost done with this chapter. We're going to end early today, by the way. We cannot think that American women in general, even those who are most eager in demanding what they deem the rights of their sex, have failed to comprehend their duties in regard to the schools in which their sons and daughters are educated. It was today's lack, today's evil, today's problem that ever concerned Sarah Hale. Now was the great word in her vocabulary. Make today right, she often said, and tomorrow may be right of itself. So yeah, I really think that that's kind of what she was thinking. Let's keep fixing what we can fix today. In female influence, she believed thoroughly and had caused, too, for her own influence was very great. But she had no quarrel with the opposite sex. All her life she treated men greatly, and those with whom she came in contact returned generosity for generosity. Acutely aware of the injustices and inequalities imposed upon women, she saw these wrongs as an inheritance from the long past. Time, not time only, but time plus effort, that alone she knew would bring redress. Gladly, therefore, she spent her life in righting the immediate wrong, and after that the next immediate, concerning herself with such practical things as introducing her friend A.T. Stewart, the great merchant philanthropist, to try the experiment of employing saleswomen as well as salesmen in his New York store. See? Chipping away. Stewart's was the shop then. Women's success with him assured her of opening elsewhere. It was Mrs. Hale, too, who saw that waiting on table in public places was work women could do as well. So waitresses, if not better than men, and demanded that they be given such obvious employment. Always she kept watch over the entrance of women into every new field. As early as 1852, she was running in her magazine frequent articles under the general heading Employment of Women that gave detailed information concerning all industries, occupations, and professions into which women were already entered. Constantly she suggested the opening of more. Godey's itself, from the day Mrs. Hale took editorial charge, employed women in every available position, and it was through the magazine's example that many another publishing concern fell into the way of using women in the discharge of the lighter duties. In 1851, said the book, women were employed in both the factory and office of the Cheney Brothers silk mills, an example cited by the magazine to suggest that some types of manufactories might well open their industrial doors to indigent females who have the right to work in the name. Too much candy. Not enough candy? I don't know. Indigent females who have the right to work in the name of freedom and their own self-respect. Sarah Hale was not a suffragist, but she was the greatest feminist of her times, and if, above all other needs, causes, reforms, and aspirations, she put her faith in education, has time proved her wrong. Still like Sarah Hale. She's pretty awesome. So chapter 15 next time is going to be the authorial galaxy. She wrote books. She wrote a lot in the magazine. We'll see what that's about. Yes, 20th century grammar can be a real tongue twister, and when Ruth Finley writes it, this woman is the run-on sentence queen. But I do love her turn of phrase. So, when you pick up the cat brush, you're swarmed. Yeah. I don't know. My two, they like to be brushed, but they don't necessarily seek it out. So, I got one of those mister brushes. I think they're steam brushes, like for steaming your cat. You know, it's not really steam. It's really fine mist. My one cat loves it. She'll just like, oh, brush me more. So, you want to say hello to the people? Hello people. Happy Halloween. Oh, so I'll put my witch's hat back on. So tomorrow I head down to the DAR for their symposium, And that'll be tomorrow and Saturday. Thank you, Kenny. I have a little tiny pincushion and my measuring tape. Oh, thank you. Renee, how are you? Long time no see. So yes, tomorrow and Saturday are the DAR. So I will have lots to tell you about from that show, because I'm there's a bunch of papers and lectures being given, and then there's the actual exhibit, the show that's there. I have had the catalog, the exhibit catalog for months now. Yes, DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution Museum. They have an incredible collection of quilts, textiles, costumes, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's some good stuff. So yeah, so that symposium is tomorrow and Saturday. Wish me luck getting there. I have completely changed my commuting plans. I think I'm gonna have to take the train one day and do like a sort of halfway thing the next day. What has this cat knocked over? So yeah, wish me luck for that and actually getting there. I heard that there's going to be a women's march this weekend. Of course there is. I don't know why the DAR decided to hold this thing. This must have just been the best weekend for them. Anyway, I'll have lots to tell you about that. I hope you guys have a wonderful Halloween evening, whether you're, entertaining the trick-or-treaters or just laying low like I am. And yeah, have a super weekend, and I will see you on Monday. And as always, so good to see some strangers that I haven't seen in a while. And thank you guys for being here, as always. It's such a pleasure. And, I wouldn't read these books. I wouldn't get these books read if I wasn't here. But also, I think my days would not be as joyful. Mondays and Thursdays are so great because I get to talk to you guys. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Don't forget, clock's turning back this weekend, at least here in the U.S., unless you live in, some part of Arizona and Hawaii, I think. I can never remember where they don't turn back. So anyway, you might be an hour early someplace. Who knows? Take care, y'all, and I will see you soon. Mwah!